Hey everybody, welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Today we've got a special episode with Dr. Kelly Brogan. We're going to have an opportunity to pick her brain today, and there's a lot of picking to be done. I've just finished reading her new book, Own Yourself. If you don't have a copy, you should get one. You can see I've got all my markers in the book. It's not very often I read a book and actually mark it up to such a great degree, but this was a really well-written book, Kelly, and I love the prose in it. I love the way it was written. I love the stories, like everything that went into it. You can tell it came from a place of the heart, and it wasn't just another book about diet change, right? So,
Thank you. That means a lot to me. I really appreciate that, and it's true. It's pretty much everything I myself needed to learn over the past decade or so, kind of crammed into one place.
Which it definitely shows. Can you share with the audience a little bit about your, how you came into this? Because you're a trained psychiatrist originally, and I know you had like more of a religious dogmatic belief about, medicine is science and medicine is like where it's at. Can you kind of walk everyone through your story of kind of transformation of knowledge and body and spirit and everything else?
Yeah. So this is an important bit of context, that I was a card-carrying, pill-pushing psychiatrist. I mean, so much so that I specialized in prescribing to pregnant and breastfeeding women. That's how much I believed in it. And, I reflect on how much I fit into kind of what we're calling like the materialist mold, right? So if you can see it, you can measure it, then it's real. And if you can't, then it's not. So for me, even though I specialized in psychiatry, which actually means doctor of the soul, I never heard the word soul once in my entire training, and I was pretty happy about that. It wouldn't have resonated for me. And so when I began to wake up to a different perspective on the science, PubMed.com published science, which I did because of my diagnosis with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, I took all of that, dogmatic, rigid, kind of like this is the way energy. And then I just displaced it and I put it into so-called alternative medicine. And that's when my activism career began. And I was really pretty enraged. Despite having put this potentially chronic illness into remission, I didn't feel like butterflies and unicorns. I felt a lot of anger. I felt betrayal by the system that I invested all this money, time, blood, sweat, and tears in. And I set out with my first book to kind of take down industry, like that was my intention. And I felt like, well, I can do it as good as anyone else, and I'm ready to roll. It was like a Braveheart kind of, energy that I had. And then life threw me a lot of curveballs, including love. I fell madly in love with my now husband, Sayer, and that totally dismantled the fabric of my postcard existence, because I was the kind of person who had my whole life set up, the way I thought it was supposed to be and the way I thought it would look forever. And then I focused on my activism, and that's where I put all of my heart and soul. And so I experienced a profound correction there, and I began to do some deep, growth and transformation. And I started to go through what is called the dark night of the soul. And I started to see the parallels in my experience, really allowing my ego and my identity to dissolve, and my patients' experiences as they were coming off of psychiatric medications. Because 10 years ago, I put down my prescription pad, and I never started a patient on medication to this day again. And I focused on helping people to come off of medication. That became my passion. And I began to see, it's not about a fight. It's not about even the better way versus the worst way. It's just about coming into deep alignment with your truth. And what that means is that you're not lying to yourself anymore. And you're not putting all of your hidden parts projected out onto the world and then hating the world for the parts of you that you're not ready to love. But, these concepts would have been way over my head even, a few years ago. And now I feel like I live and breathe this kind of growth, and it's such a more easeful way of existing. There's, as you know, there's so much less fear in it, because your first reflex to any challenge or adversity is curiosity. It's like, wow, what is this about? My knee is like throbbing. What's that about? What does that potentially mean for me, to me? And what can I do with that information versus a reflexive a fear of your body and the sense that, the other shoe is going to drop at any moment and you have to be vigilant, because that fight or flight state of being is totally incompatible, as you well know, with regeneration. And so it's kind of like a win-win-win to move into this mindset shift that now characterizes my personal work and my professional work and certainly, this latest book.
So you put down your spear and sword, sounds like, and embraced. I like what you said. You embraced your truth, and I've always said that the path forward always starts with the mirror, right? The honest and brutal truth to yourself. And it's amazing to hear you kind of express that, because a lot of people that I've experienced coming through my clinic, I'm sure you too, have really been lying to themselves in a very big way.
Yeah.
One of the things you talked about in your book, and I want to read, because again, I love the prose in your book, like just well, eloquently written. But I'm going to read to the audience for a minute here, just a paragraph. This is, here we go. The true scope of our wandering from the path of right living is obscured by multi-billion-dollar industries that are invested in meeting our primary needs with superficial satisfactions. Such satisfactions never do meet our true needs, but rather increase the symptoms of what is being labeled as mental illness. And then you go on to talk about evolutionary mismatch. I'd love, because you talk about McDonald's and you talk about like all these things that are people's norms, right? And so then when their body is screaming at them that, yes, this may be your norm, but this is an evolutionary mismatch for what you should be doing. Can you dive a little bit into that concept and just talk to the audience a little bit about it?
Yeah. So remember that I came to the realm of holistic medicine and lifestyle change and nutrition, like over the bridge of science. I was never a yogi. I wasn't raised by bohemian parents. I never, I was a belligerent atheist, that the concept of spirituality or belief in some higher purpose or power was totally anathema to my consciousness. So I came and took one step in front of the other through these these pebbles of research. And I began to encounter this term evolutionary mismatch in the published medical literature. And what it refers to is the set of environmental exposures that now, through our understanding of epigenetics, are expected by the human genome, right, over millions of years of evolution. And you could take a very kind of utilitarian perspective on it, or you can say there's a right balance that we're supposed to have with the natural world, and we're going to always be guided back to that. And part of the way that we are guided is through symptoms. Like symptoms kind of tap you on the shoulder, like, hey, not that, right? Like not 4 Snickers a day. Like, hey, your feet are actually supposed to touch the earth. We're supposed to connect in that way, So, but in the medical literature, it's really a physiologic driver of inflammatory response. So when you are, sometimes it's actually, again, in the literature called paleo deficit disorder. When you are out of like a circadian rhythm that is normative for your biology, when you are exposed to processed food that has a molecular signature that is totally patentable, right? So that's not recognizable as a native molecule, when you're experiencing stress that is not in a normative rhythm, right? Where your stress and vigilance response is constantly on, maybe even at a low level. That's not what we evolved to experience either. And of course, then there's the layer of toxicant exposures, industrial pollution, electromagnetic radiation, and it goes on and on and on. It even encompasses the way that we come into the world, right? So, the nature of pregnancy and childbirth and early mother-infant contact. So it can be really overwhelming and feel like, oh my God, like the sky is falling, or it can feel like all that's going on. I'm sure it's not great, but look at us, we're fine, But are we really fine? And what I have noted is that those of us who are the least fine, right? So those of us who've collected a couple diagnoses, who open a bunch of pill bottles with our name on it every day, that rather than those individuals being fundamentally sick or broken or kind of like damaged goods, which ends up being the not even subliminal, the messaging that is transmitted to these folks. Instead of that, what I've come to, appreciate is that it's possible that these are the canaries in the coal mine. So these are the people who are rightfully sensitive, right? Whose responses that we call symptoms to this mismatch is actually, an attuned instrument, right? Because it's like, I quote Krishnamurti often when he said, it's no sign of health to be well adapted to a profoundly sick society. So should we be well right now? Probably not. And if you're not, that means that your response system is intact and that your level of sensitivity is exquisite, right? So how do you work with that sensitivity? How do you turn that into something that you leverage for your own creative energy and for your power to experience your life on your terms? That's possible. And that transformational process, it's really not magical. It involves, a mindset shift, and then it involves the engagement of a commitment to self-care that is probably uncomfortable, right? Because we're so other-oriented. We're so used to manicuring the lawn of our performance in society, and it's often uncomfortable to turn inward towards what we're eating, what we're drinking, what we're thinking, how we are mitigating, toxic exposures, and to begin to really, really prioritize that without any exceptions often is what maybe sends that signal to the nervous system, like something different is going on here, so that plasticity and change, growth can begin to emerge from that.
So many, I'll say women, but it's not just women, it's women and men. But in my experience, 80% of the people I see are women. I think more speaks to that women are more willing to kind of ask deeper questions when things go wrong. But so many of them are, they're so influenced by culture and society. And we live in this Alice in Wonderlandian like world where, up is down and down is up, and, healthy is unhealthy and unhealthy is healthy now. Where do you take people first? Like, so going back to what you were just saying is like, okay, here's a person who's really in contact with their body, and they're really maybe hypersensitive, the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, like hypersensitive to the illness, to the symptoms that their body is trying to speak to them and say, hey, change or do something different. How do you help them or get them to overcome their husband telling them that they need to be on the medication, their doctor telling them that they need to be on the medication, their best friends, their social circles and peers? Everybody is looking at them and trying to kind of force them, coerce them into this tunnel of, dogmatic, this is the way you should do it. How do you get them to be able to have the courage to break out of that box?
I love that question. It's a reclamation process. And what I mean by that, and why the book is called Own Yourself, is that's what's going on. You are literally pulling back all the cords of tethered connection to everyone who you have empowered with agency over your life experience and over your body. And you mentioned women who are, I think, chiefly representative of this kind of dynamic empowerment of government, of medical establishments, of doctors, and, of course, those in their life, partners, whatever, their own mothers. We give that power away, and then we live a life of dependency and vulnerability and fear. And that has a signature, has a neurobiological signature. When you are living in that state, your body registers that, and you cannot heal, you cannot regenerate, and then your whole life is just treading water. Right. And so there gets to be a point, for many of us, it's like around our 30s, where we start to become aware that we are indeed wearing this mask, right? And we start to feel this self-consciousness of the parts of us that we are actively hiding, and then the parts of us we're curating in order to please those around us and to feel like good girls, right? But of course, this applies to men as well. And so that awareness of the mask often, invites an opportunity to make this choice, right? You come to this fork in the road. Often it's through loss or illness or, diagnosis. And you can either strap that mask on tighter, right? So extra tape and strings, and you can just double down on who you've determined that you are. Or you can recognize, wow, I've been curating a version of myself probably my entire adult life. I've done everything I possibly can to feel okay, and I still feel scared and lost and, unfulfilled and confused, and like something deep is missing, right? So you can choose to just let that mask fall. And that courageous path is the healing path of self-discovery. And that's when you begin slowly to learn who you really are. That's why all of the individuals I've ever worked with or come through our online program, they say the same thing. I remember the 15th time I heard it, I said, how is this what you have to say after all this? And they will say, I finally feel like myself. And I remember I thought you didn't want to feel like yourself. I thought that's why you were doing all of this. And I've come to understand that's all that any of us want. We want to feel comfort in our own skin, familiarity with all the parts of us so that there's never this effort towards trying to make sure the good parts are shown and the bad parts are hidden, and a sense of mastery over who it is we are so that we can show up to every single experience in life knowing that we've got what we need, knowing that we've got what it takes, and fundamentally being the ones who tell ourselves everything's okay, right? We don't need anyone else to say that, right? So you get really comfortable. You become okay with not being okay, right? And so that's a voyage beyond the pale, it's called, like when you kind of leave your tribe and you go where you've been told not to go, it is a terrifying experience. And sometimes that can look like not taking a medication, like you said, when everyone else thinks that's the only responsible thing to do. And so that's how I've come to understand that, listen, I'm in your corner. I have done everything and anything I can to represent a scientific perspective on why we should be questioning the reflexive allopathic interventions, right? But in the end, this isn't a science war. And in the end, you're the one who's got to walk this path one foot in front of the other, right? But do you have to do it on your own? And that's where I've learned about the power of community. Because when you have an incubator space, a safe container of people who think similarly and are on crossing similar thresholds, it just empowers you and it protects you in a way that wouldn't be available if you were just, a mercenary doing this on your own. And I began to appreciate that when this protocol that's in the book, and honestly, you read it, it's not rocket science, right? When I started to see that when I took the protocol I used in private practice, I put it online, literally the same handouts, the same videos, the same everything, okay? And then the outcomes that I started to get from our online program, Vital Mind Reset, were like far and away more robust than what I was getting from my private practice. One-on-one, people flying from all over the world, spending a lot of money, orders of magnitude, actually more than the program. And I started to I was like, what am I doing wrong? It seems like the closer they are to me, the worse they do. And that's when I began to appreciate, okay, this is about community. I don't offer the patients in my private practice community. And the only difference between the two versions of the protocol is that community element. So I've come to really appreciate that as being an essential element of walking this pretty audacious path.
Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.